Life is full of mundane, ordinary events. Your nose is stuffed, you blow it out. When you leave home, you have to make sure you got your pants on, not inside out or front to back, but you have them on right. These are just mundane things. Meals have to be prepared, the house has to be vacuumed, the grass has to be cut, the dog walked. Many times these events occur with our minds in neutral. Because they're just so mundane and ordinary. Daydreaming can assuage some of the boredom. Ruth chapter 2 shows many of these mundane events. Ruth goes to work, she gleans grain, the workers cut the sheaves and the women tie them. On the threshing floor, the grain is separated from the stalks and the grain is separated from the chaff by throwing it up into the wind. For us, this is novel because we just don't see this every day, right? But for them, this was ordinary. This is what they had to do every year. It was just monotonous. Additionally, there are extraordinary events that cause great excitement. Birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day. These are days where we honor certain people. They become the center of attention. We tell them that we love them, we value them. July 1st, Canada Day. We go and watch fireworks. Not this year, but in previous years. We thank God for some of our freedoms, etc. These are more extraordinary events. And in Ruth, we have seen some extraordinary events. Things like the death of the family members, the famine. These were not good things, they're rare things, but they're extraordinary events. In Ruth chapter 3, there's going to be a celebration, which was important and actually leaves Ruth and Boaz alone in the dark. An interesting chapter. Interspersed through the ordinary and the extraordinary events are some other events that also cause great excitement. They're called lucky events. For instance, the radio announcer announces the 5th caller will win a trip on a Caribbean cruise. And so, you try and figure you're not gonna win, but you try anyway, why not? And you are the 5th caller, right? You're lucky, you won. It was a random thing, right? Lucky ducky, random events, and they greatly benefit us. These are the lucky events of life. And so Ruth chapter 2 is about those ordinary, extraordinary, and those lucky events that occur. And I think that's one of the reasons why the book of Ruth is so appealing. There's a sense in which we can empathize with the characters. We have an affinity with them. They live the kind of life we live. There's no miracles. There's no one walking on water. Food is not miraculous produced for the people. Naomi is not suddenly pregnant like Sarah. No miracles, just ordinary, extraordinary, and a few lucky events, much like our own lives. And the God we meet in Ruth is also the kind of God that most of us meet in life. He is not the God who parts the Red Sea, right, and tells you to walk across on dry sand. He is not the God who appears in a burning bush that doesn't burn. Instead, God is the God who is experienced, like the characters in Ruth, in the ordinary, extraordinary, and lucky events in life. There's no direct intervention. There's no miracles, but only the God who is hidden behind the scenes of life, behind these events that occur. And for most of us, this is the God that we experience. We read about the miracles in the Bible, but most of us will never experience one because they are very rare. By definition, a miracle is rare. So for most of us, we experience not the God who will lift up our car and miraculously fly us to our job so we're not late, but instead we experience the God who gets the traffic moving so that we can make it to work on time. This is the God that we experience. So in chapters 2, we're going to see that God is in control of the ordinary, the extraordinary, and the lucky events. Now, we've had some foreshadowing of good things to come for the characters. In chapter 1, verse 1, the author informed us that there was a famine in the land, and just like in Genesis, where famines advanced God's purposes for his people, so we think that also will happen here in Ruth, that this famine that occurred is going to advance this family somehow. Secondly, in chapter 1, verse 6, we had a partial reversal of one of the misfortunes, namely famine, because Naomi hears that there's now food in the land. And so, and now she's returned to Bethlehem, so we've had two reversals, famine, the exile, and so now we're waiting for the third reversal where there's now family members, children born in this family. And the third foreshadowing is found in chapter 1, verse 22, where the author tells us that they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And this foreshadows that there's some kind of abundance coming in the future. So, chapter 2, we begin to see that God is the one who's in control of the good events in life. Chapter 1 was, not so good events, right? Kind of like the bad luck, right? You lose your family members, you got a famine, you leave your country where you live. Even when you come back, Naomi says, came back empty, right? And so chapter 1 is kind of like this whole thing that I'm empty. I'm empty. But chapter 2 starts reversing. It's no longer Mara, bitter, but now it's sweetness. Good things are going to begin to happen. And so, it's just like her name, Naomi, sweetness. So first of all, let's look at God is in control of the lucky events. Ruth, when she arrives, she takes very little time to rest in Bethlehem because she knows that they need food and it's the barley harvest and she's got to get out there into the fields. So she tells Naomi that she's going out to the field to glean. Naomi concurs. And so off she goes, playing the part of the kinsman redeemer, right? Taking care of this family. Verse 3 says, and here's the key. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. She happened is literally, she chanced upon chance of getting into the field of Boaz. This is luck. From a human perspective, it's an accidental event. It's a random event. It just kind of happened, right? It was lucky. It was fortunate. She could have landed on other fields that belonged to other people. I mean, if she had walked a little bit further, she would have been in somebody else's field. Or if she hadn't walked far enough, she would have been in a neighboring field. You have to think that the agricultural field was outside the city of Bethlehem, and you would have if you would have looked from Bethlehem, you would have just seen a large field. You would not have seen fences dividing the fields, because they just didn't do it that way. You would have just seen a large field. And what they did was very similar to what Europeans did years ago, is my boundary is that big rock over there to that very old tree over here, right? And that became your boundary for your part of the field. So as Ruth goes out there, she doesn't know whose field she's going to end up on. She doesn't know at all. But she just happened to land on Boaz's field. This was good luck, not bad luck, for as we shall see, Boaz plays a pivotal part in the survival of this family. But where is God in all of this? Well, God is the force behind the luck. He controls those random events. People don't win lotteries just because there's an uncontrolled force of spinning the wheel around, right? No, not at all. God is behind that spinning of the wheel. He actually determines what comes out. He is the ultimate cause of where that wheel will stop, which number will come out in bingo. So by making reference to luck or chance or random events here, the author is using striking understatement. He's making hyperbole, which is meant to leave the reader with the sense of the exact opposite. It's lucky, yeah, but you know what? That's really God behind it all. He's the one that's doing it. So we can say that it seems that chance has smiled upon Ruth, but the smile is actually upon the face of God. There's a second chance event that occurs. Ruth arrives at the right time. She could have arrived after Boaz had left, or on a day when Boaz isn't even coming to the field. But she doesn't. She arrives before Boaz, and she's there long enough to actually have him come and meet her. So the timing is a lucky thing. And sometimes timing is all important. Some people get jobs just because they had the right timing. They needed somebody, you had your resume in there that day, and they met you, and yeah, you got it, right? Or some special at a store, you just happened to be in the store, you got the special. Other people didn't. Timing is really important, and God is the God of timing. So we see that God is behind all of these chance, random events in life, and He's in control of them. Secondly, God is in control of the ordinary events of life. So Ruth heads out to the field to glean. This is what she would have seen. She would have seen that field, big, wide open. There were no real set boundaries. And when she gets out to the field, she would have seen workers. The men would have had, the stalks would have been high, and how they did it was the men would grab a bunch of stalks, and then with a sickle, they would cut the stalks. And then when they couldn't manage the bundle, they put the bundles down in rows, and then the ladies would come along and they would tie the bundles, ready for transportation to go to the threshing floor. And this is how they did it. And so the threshing floor was just this wide open space, about 25 to 40 feet in diameter. And usually they liked it on a ledge of some sort because they wanted a windy area. And so they would, they prepare the site, get all the rocks, whatever's on there, and they sweep it up and that kind of thing. And then what they would do is they would put the sheaves, that's the cut stalks, they would just put them down about a foot thick. And then if you had a sledge, which was this machine that would just crunch it all, the sledge would be pushed along by either donkeys or oxen. So if you had a sledge, you would have a driver of the sledge, you'd have people helping out with the animals, right? And we'll go around in a circle, and you just keep going around. We go mundane, right? Even for the animals. Around in a circle all day. And what would happen is, as they go, the weight would separate the grain from the sheaf, the stalk. And so then you'd have rocks all around the threshing floor, and this would keep all of the sheaves inside that area. And then you'd have people with forks, right, and they would push the stalks to where the sledge is going around, or the animals are trampling, right, and they pull out the stuff that's already been separated, right, because the stalk itself they would keep, and they would feed the animals after, right. And so once that was all done, and they've separated the stalk from the actual grain, now came the winnowing. And so winnowing would happen when you have a nice breeze happen. Because what they would do is they would take the grain and they'd throw it up in the air, and the wind would blow the husks away, and the grain would fall back down to the ground because it's heavy, right? And the wind can't take the husks. The grain. It would just take the husks. And then after, they would just gather it up, and they put the grain through a sieve and into a clay jar, and that's where they would store the grain. And so this is what's going on as Ruth goes out to the field. This is what is happening. Now, according to the welfare system of the Israelites, Ruth was allowed to glean in the fields. So the welfare system was quite different from ours today. Ours today, you go and you pick up a check, or you pick up, food vouchers and that kind of thing. Well, that was not the case in the Israelite welfare system. What they would have to do is they'd have to go out and work. And so each farmer would leave the borders of his field for the poor. So the poor would go and cut it and do that whole process, right? And then the other thing is, as they're cutting and they're placing them in bundles and rows, if any fell out, that would also be for the poor. So if you forgot a bundle out there, well, it's not yours anymore. That belongs to the poor. And that's how they did it. So Leviticus 23 verse 22 says, "When you reap the harvest of your land, moreover, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field." Right? You got to leave that portion. "Nor gather the gleaning of your harvest." That's the stuff that you dropped. "You are to leave them for the needy and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God." God was the legal landowner, and he sets down the rights. So what would happen is you would have the reapers, the men cutting, the women tying, and behind them you would have the poor. But the landowners would not want the poor too close to their workers. They keep a distance. So when Ruth comes to this particular field, maybe she tried, doing some gleaning out in the field, but there wasn't very much or whatever. She comes to the foreman and she says, "Hey, look, I would like to glean among the sheaves, the piles that you've created, right? I want to come and pick up around there as opposed to, picking out in the field." And so the foreman couldn't answer her, had to wait for Boaz to come to get permission. So Boaz comes, and that gets us into the extraordinary events. At this point, this is all ordinary. This is just the way life was in Bethlehem during the harvest period. It was monotonous. You would go from the barley harvest in late April, and then you go to the wheat harvest that ended in near the end of June. And so Ruth is just trying to collect as much food as she can during that period of time. So again, God does not miraculously provide for Ruth and Naomi. Ruth works very hard to get her food. The sun is beating down on her. She's sweating like crazy, I'm sure. Not easy, toilsome, mundane routine. So thirdly, God is in control of the extraordinary events. And here is one. So Boaz approaches Ruth and says, "Listen carefully, my daughter." Where have we heard that before? My daughter. Well, we've only heard it from the lips of Naomi. Remember? Naomi never calls them daughters-in-law. She always calls them daughters. Here we have Boaz calling her my daughter. Well, at the very least, this means that he's being very tender towards her, very kind. I mean, this must have felt like a hot bath after a grueling, sweaty day, those words, or like a good meal after a fast. Because remember, she's gone through some traumatic experiences, and now she's in a country where she's a foreigner. She's been called Ruth the Moabitess throughout this whole section. She's got very few rights and even fewer privileges. And yet, here's Boaz saying, "my daughter," which is just a term of affection, right? It would have been tender, soft, gentle for her. And we all need to learn to deal tenderly with each other. Proverbs says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. When you speak tenderly to someone, you soon see, they start to melt. The shoulders come down. The tenseness drops. This is an important feature, speaking tenderly. Another extraordinary event is the status and the privilege that's given to Ruth. He tells her to follow his maids and stay close to them. I mean, this gave Ruth special privilege that no other gleaners would have. Perhaps it might be equivalent to, the most favored gleaner, something like that. Anyways, she's not to be hassled by the workers. Boaz says, "Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you." Remember, this is the period of the judges where everybody does what is right in their own eyes. There is evil rampant throughout the land. And Boaz is here protecting Ruth. So nobody is going to say to her, no, you can't take those. No, don't touch that. Nobody's going to say that because she has special permission from Boaz. Not only that, another extraordinary event is Boaz grants Ruth the privilege to drink his water. The young man would go to the well and bring water in the skins, and then the workers could drink from there. Now you have to think the climate is hot. And in order to be productive, you have to be hydrated, or else you just slow down. And after a while, you just want to sleep. So water was really important. And the well was not in the field. The well was a distance from the field. So this would have saved her time. It would give her the water that she needs. For us here in BC, it's hard to understand because we've got water everywhere. But that was not the case in Palestine. And then another extraordinary event is that she is invited to come and eat with Boaz's workers. And he gives her food for her to dip in this wine sauce. And he gives her so much food that she has leftovers. Okay, you see the theme beginning to come. Chapter 1 was kind of like a theme of emptiness, right? Chapter 2, you begin that theme of fullness, abundance. It's beginning here, right? She has more than she needs to eat. Extraordinary events. She takes the leftovers home to Naomi. So Ruth also does extraordinary things too. She comes home with 30 pounds. An ephah is about 30 pounds of grain. This woman worked hard. She not only collected, but at the end of the day, she went and she threshed it and winnowed it, and she brought about 30 pounds home. So she's bringing a lot of food home to Naomi. And of course, Naomi is quite surprised at this. She says, "Where did you glean today? And where did you work? May he who took notice of you be pleased." And Ruth also gives her the leftovers so that she has immediate food. These are extraordinary events that God is in these too. But it's interesting that a lot of these are actually the actions of people. And the actions of people are in some sense also the actions of God. So we've seen that God controls the lucky events, the ordinary events, the extraordinary events. Ponder through your life how God has been behind the scenes, controlling and working the events in your life so that you are where you are today. He is sovereign. He's in control. He watches over us. Let's pray. Father in heaven,